John had always been alone in the wilderness. It wasn't that he liked being alone, but after everything that had happened, he preferred it. The quiet of the forest, the sound of the wind through the trees, and the peacefulness of nature were his only companions. Now, he had left the city, left the chaos behind, and moved to a small cabin in the mountains. Life had been simpler here, away from the troubles of the world. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a deep shade of orange, John was collecting firewood near the edge of the forest. He heard a faint cry, like a soft whisper, carried by the wind. At first, he thought it was just an animal, or perhaps the wind playing tricks. But then the cry came again, louder this time, and full of pain. It sent a chill down his spine. John dropped the firewood and moved toward the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. As he pushed through the trees, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A young girl lying on the forest floor, her body covered in blood and dirt. She was breathing, but just barely. Her skin was a strange shade of pale, unlike anything John had ever seen before. He froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. The girl's eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at him with a mix of fear and desperation. She tried to speak, but her words were slurred and weak. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. They'll kill me." John's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea who they were, but the fear in her eyes told him that whatever was coming, it was bad. His instincts kicked in. He couldn't just leave her here to die. He knelt beside her, careful not to hurt her further, and gently touched her arm. It felt cold to the touch, like she was already on the edge of death. "Who did this to you?" John asked, his voice soft and steady. The girl's eyes filled with tears, and she struggled to speak. "My people, they turned on me. I'm not one of them anymore." Her voice broke, and she coughed, wincing in pain. John felt a wave of sadness wash over him. She was hurt, alone, and clearly in need of help. There was no way he could just leave her here. But the question gnawed at him. Who was she? Why was she so far from any town or settlement? And who had done this to her? Despite his confusion, John knew one thing. She couldn't stay here. He couldn't just let her die in the woods. With effort, John lifted the girl into his arms. She was lighter than she looked, her body frail from whatever she had been through. As he carried her back toward his cabin, his mind raced. Who was she, and what kind of danger had she been running from? The girl seemed to drift in and out of consciousness, barely able to keep her eyes open. Her breath was shallow, and John could hear her mumbling under her breath, but he couldn't make out the words. It wasn't until they reached the cabin that she finally managed to speak again. "Please, don't let them find me," she begged, her voice shaking. "They will kill you. They don't care about anyone. Just me." John didn't know what to make of her words. Whoever they were, it sounded like the girl was in deep trouble. But what could he do? He had no experience with aliens or people from other planets. He was just a man who had left everything behind to find peace in the mountains. He placed her gently on his bed, covering her with a blanket. Her clothes were torn, and her skin was marked with strange symbols he didn't recognize. It was then that he realized something that made his blood run cold. She wasn't human. She had to be something else. Something alien. But before his mind could process this new reality, the girl's hand gripped his wrist, pulling him back to the present. "Don't leave me," she whispered, her eyes pleading. "If you leave me, they'll find me, and it will be too late." John looked down at her, his heart heavy with confusion and concern. He had never believed in aliens or anything beyond what he could see, but this girl. She wasn't from Earth. She was different, and there was something about her that made him want to protect her. He didn't know why, but he couldn't just walk away. "I'm not going to leave you," John said, his voice firm, though doubt lingered in his mind. "I'll protect you, no matter what." The girl gave him a small, tired smile, the first he had seen since he found her. "Thank you," she whispered, before falling into a deep, exhausted sleep, as John sat down beside her, watching over her as the night grew darker. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. He had no idea who she was or what kind of danger they were in, but one thing was certain: he was in this now. And no matter the cost, he would protect her. But he had no idea what kind of world he had just stepped into, or how far he would have to go to keep her safe. And that was the scariest thought of all. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting a soft glow across the cabin. John sat beside the fire, his mind racing. The girl was still asleep, her breathing steady, but shallow. He couldn't help but watch her, feeling a strange sense of responsibility growing within him. She wasn't from this world. He had seen enough in the short time since he found her to know that. But who was she? Why had she been left to die in the forest? And why had she trusted him? His questions were endless, but there was no one to answer them. He wasn't a scientist or an expert in alien cultures. He was just a man who had left everything behind to live in the mountains. But here he was, with a strange, injured girl in his care. And he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't turn his back on her. As the fire crackled, John stood and walked to the window. The forest outside was peaceful, but the world beyond it felt like a different, more dangerous place. He could feel the weight of the girl's fear hanging in the air. She had said she was being hunted, but by whom and why? Suddenly, he heard a soft groan behind him. He turned quickly to see the girl stirring in the bed, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around the room, her eyes wide with confusion, and then locked onto him. "You're still here," she said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. John nodded, offering a small smile, though he still felt uneasy. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "You're safe here." The girl's eyes softened, and for the first time, John saw a hint of trust in them. She sat up slowly, wincing at the pain that must have been coursing through her body. Her injuries were severe, but they weren't life-threatening if treated right away. John had done his best to clean the wounds and bandage them, but he wasn't a doctor. He just hoped it was enough. I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I never thought anyone would help me. But not after what happened." John frowned. "What happened? Why were they trying to kill you?" The girl hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. Then she spoke, her voice low and filled with pain. "I was once part of a great race, a powerful people," she began. "But we became too ambitious, too greedy. We started to conquer other worlds, to control them. We lost our way." John listened intently, trying to make sense of her words. It was hard to imagine such a thing. Alien races, conquerors, and galactic empires were ideas he had only ever heard of in science fiction movies. But looking at her, he knew she was telling the truth. "Something went wrong," she continued, her voice shaking. "There was a rebellion, a group of us. We were blamed for everything. We were exiled, cast away from our people. I was one of the last to be thrown out." John felt a pang of sympathy for her. It was clear she was carrying the weight of her people's mistakes on her shoulders. And now she was alone, hunted, and broken. He couldn't imagine the kind of pain that must bring. "I didn't choose this," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. "I didn't want to be part of it, but now I'm nothing. Just a prisoner in my own skin." The pain in her voice was unmistakable. John could feel her struggle, the inner turmoil that tore at her. She wasn't just an alien on the run, she was a broken soul, lost and searching for redemption. But the question remained, could she ever find it? For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the room was the crackling of the fire. John looked at her, and something stirred deep. Within him, he had always been a solitary man, but in that moment, he didn't feel so alone. There was something about her, something that called to him, made him want to protect her, even though he barely understood who she was or what her past held. "I don't know what happened to your people," John said quietly, "but I know what it's like to feel lost, and I'm not going to leave you alone." The girl's eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and gratitude. She seemed to search his face, trying to determine if he was telling the truth. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice soft but full of curiosity. John paused, unsure of how to answer. He didn't know why he felt so compelled to help her. Maybe it was her vulnerability or the desperation in her eyes. Maybe it was the feeling that, somehow, they were connected to lost souls in a world that didn't understand them. Or maybe it was just that he couldn't turn his back on someone who needed him. "I don't really know," he admitted. "I guess. Maybe because you need help, and I can give it. Maybe because, for the first time in a long time, I don't feel so alone." The girl looked at him, and for a brief moment, her gaze softened. She gave him a small, shaky smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't know what will happen to me, but I'm glad you're here." John nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the promise he had just made. He had no idea what the future held, or if he could truly protect her from the dangers that lurked beyond the mountains. But he knew one thing. He would do whatever it took to keep her safe. She wasn't just some alien running from the past. She was someone who had lost everything. And in that loss, she had found him. And he would not let her down. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. John spent his mornings chopping firewood, hunting for food, and doing what he could to keep the cabin running smoothly. The girl she still hadn't told him her name was growing stronger with each passing day. But her wounds hadn't fully healed yet. Every now and then, he would catch her staring off into the distance. Her eyes clouded with thoughts of a past she seemed to want to forget. She hadn't said much about herself since the night he brought her to the cabin. There were moments when she would start to speak, but then she would fall silent, as if the words were too painful to share. John understood the feeling. The weight of the past was something both of them carried, though neither of them had chosen it. But as the days went on, John found himself growing more curious. He wanted to know who she was, what had happened to her, and what kind of world she came from. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth and the wind howled outside, John decided to ask. The girl was sitting by the window, her back to him, gazing out into the forest. Her long hair was matted with dirt, but she still had a beauty to her that made John's heart ache. She looked so fragile, so broken. He knew that. It wasn't just her body that was scarred, was her soul. "Why don't you tell me about your past?" John asked gently, sitting down beside her. "What happened to you? You don't have to hide it from me. I can't help you if I don't know what you're running from." For a long moment, she didn't respond. Her fingers traced the edge of the window, her gaze never leaving the dark expanse of the forest outside. The wind made the trees sway, their shadows dancing on the walls. It felt as if time itself had stopped, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she spoke. Her voice soft, but filled with a deep sadness. "I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always... a prisoner." John's heart tightened. He could hear the pain in her voice, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. She wasn't just an alien, she was someone who had lost everything. He had to remind himself that she was a person who had once had a life, a purpose, and a place in the world. I was born into a great and powerful race, she began, her voice trembling slightly. We ruled over many worlds, and we believed that we were superior to everyone else. Our empire was vast, so vast that we thought nothing could stop us. She paused, her eyes distant as if reliving a memory she wished she could forget. But we were wrong, she continued, her voice darker now. We became too arrogant. We wanted more. We started conquering other planets, pushing our people and resources beyond their limits. We started to see other worlds as nothing more than things to control, to dominate. John listened intently, trying to imagine what it must have been like. The idea of an alien empire that had once been powerful, ruling over countless planets, felt like something out of a story. But as he looked at her, he realized that this was no story. This was her reality. We were a force to be reckoned with, she said. But our hunger for power eventually led to our downfall. There was a rebellion. A group of us who realized what we were doing was wrong. We tried to stop the war, to end the conquest. But we were too late. The damage had already been done. John's mind raced as he tried to process her words. A rebellion. A people fighting to stop a war they had started. It sounded like something out of a tragedy. Some of us believed in peace, she went on. We believed that the galaxy didn't need to be controlled, that other races should be free to choose their own path. But others didn't care. They saw power, and they took it. They saw weakness, and they crushed it. The ones who stood against the conquest were branded traitors. We were hunted down like animals, thrown away like trash. John's stomach tightened. The girl's story was beginning to make more sense now. She was one of the exiled, the ones who had been cast out for standing against the Empire's cruel ways, and now she was paying the price. Why did they throw you out? John asked, his voice quiet. What did you do? She looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't powerful enough. I was just one of the few who tried to stop it, okay? For that, I became a target. They didn't care who I was. They didn't care that I had tried to help. All they cared about was that I stood in the way of their empire. The weight of her words sank deep into John's heart. She wasn't just a victim of the rebellion. She was someone who had tried to do the right thing, someone who had failed and paid the price. She had been left behind, abandoned, and now she was here, in his cabin, with no one but him to turn to. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. I didn't ask for any of it. I just wanted to live, wanted to be free. John sat quietly for a moment, his mind spinning. There was so much more to her than he had first realized. She wasn't just a stranger. She was someone who had been fighting for something greater than herself. Someone who had lost everything. I can't change your past, John said finally, but I can help you now. You're not alone anymore. The girl turned to look at him, her eyes wide with surprise. For the first time since he found her, she didn't look so lost. Her gaze softened, and she gave him the smallest smile. Thank you, she said, her voice barely audible. Thank you for not turning away. John nodded, feeling a deep sense of responsibility rise within him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if he could keep her safe. But in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. He would do everything he could to protect her, and to make sure she never felt alone again. The air was colder now. The days were shorter, and the nights seemed to stretch longer, filled with whispers of danger. John had done his best to keep things calm at the cabin. The girl whose name was still a mystery was healing, but she had grown more restless. Her eyes darted around, always alert, always searching for something, or perhaps someone. John had noticed it too. She had become more jumpy, more fearful, as though something terrible was lurking just beyond the trees. One night, as the wind howled through the mountains, the girl finally spoke. "They're coming," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I can feel them." John turned to her, his heart skipping a beat. "Who?" he asked, already fearing he knew the answer. "The ones who exiled me," she replied, her face pale in the flickering firelight. "They never stop hunting those who rebelled." "I thought I was safe, but I was wrong." John felt a chill run down his spine. The stories she had told him about her people, their great empire, the rebellion, and the betrayal were no longer just words. They were real, and they were about to come crashing into his life. "They'll come for you," she continued, her eyes wide with fear. "They don't care who gets in their way. They won't stop until they have me." John's mind raced. He had always prided himself on being alone, on living without the need for others. But now, it was different. He couldn't let her face this alone. He couldn't let them take her, not after everything she had been through. He had already made a promise to protect her, and now that promise was more important than ever. "What do we do?" he asked, trying to steady his shaking hands. His mind was already working, searching for a solution, but nothing came to him. He had no weapons, no plan, just the knowledge that they were both in danger. The cabin was small, hidden deep in the forest, but it wouldn't be enough to keep them safe if an army came looking for her. "We run," the girl said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We can't stay here. They will find us." John nodded, even though every part of him screamed to stay and fight. He had no idea where they could go. The forest was vast, but it was also filled with dangers of its own. Yet he knew deep down that leaving was their only choice. For the next few hours, they packed what little they could carry. John grabbed a small rifle, some food, and a few supplies, while the girl picked through the cabin, her hands trembling as she collected what she thought they might need. She was much stronger now than when John had first found her, but he could still see the fear in her eyes as she worked. "We need to go," she said, turning toward him after a long silence. Now, John didn't argue. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, his heart pounding in his chest. The cabin felt too small now, too exposed. He knew they couldn't stay here any longer. The girl was right, they had to run. They slipped out into the cold night, moving as quietly as possible through the trees. The full moon cast a pale light across the forest, making the shadows seem even darker. John's breath misted in the air, and he could hear the girl's footsteps behind him, soft but determined, as they made their way deeper into the forest. John kept his eyes on the path ahead, trying to sense any movement, any sign that they were being followed. But the woods were silent, too silent. His instincts screamed that something wasn't right. Then, in the distance, he heard the faint sound of footsteps, the snap of a twig breaking underfoot. His heart skipped. They weren't alone. They were being hunted. He grabbed the girl's arm, pulling her into the shadows. She looked at him, her eyes wide, but she didn't ask questions. She knew what he meant. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his voice low. They crouched behind a cluster of trees, waiting, listening. The sound grew closer. John could hear the crunch of boots on the frozen ground, the rustle of clothing, and the low murmur of voices. There were at least 3 of them. Soldiers, from the way they moved, organized, purposeful, and dangerous. John's mind raced. He had to act fast. He had no idea how long they could stay hidden. The soldiers would find them soon enough. "They're here," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked up at him, fear and determination in her eyes. "You have to go. I'll hold them off." "No," John replied quickly, shaking his head. "We stay together." The girl's eyes hardened. "They'll kill you if they catch you," she said, her voice firm. "You don't understand. If they get me, they'll never stop. They'll wipe you out too." John looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He knew she was right, but he also knew he couldn't leave her. Not now, not after everything they had been through. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. "We'll make it through this," John said, his voice stronger now, filled with determination. "Just trust me." Before she could respond, the soldiers appeared, moving through the trees, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. John's grip on the rifle tightened. He knew it was now or never. "Run," he whispered to the girl. "Go." Without waiting for her response, John bolted forward, running through the trees with everything he had. He could hear the girl's footsteps behind him, and for a moment, it felt like they might make it. But the soldiers were close, too close. The hunt had begun. The night was a blur of darkness and adrenaline. John's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted through the thick woods. The sound of boots crashing behind them, growing louder. The cold air bit at his skin, but he didn't feel it. All he could focus on was the sound of their pursuers, the flashlights cutting through the trees, and the girl running beside him. She was faster than he expected, even though she had been injured. There was a strength in her movements now that reminded him of something wild, untamed. Her breath came in shallow gasps, but she never faltered, her gaze fixed ahead. John glanced over his shoulder just in time to see the soldiers break through the underbrush, their torches sweeping across the trees. They were closing in, and there was nowhere to hide. They needed to get to higher ground, away from the open forest where they could be trapped. "Over there," John shouted, pointing to a rocky ledge ahead. It wasn't much, but it was better than running through the flat land where they would be sitting ducks. The girl nodded, her eyes already scanning the terrain. She knew what he meant. They both pushed forward, their legs burning, their lungs struggling for air as they climbed the rocky path toward the ledge. John's mind was racing. He had no plan, no real idea of what to do if they were caught, but he wasn't going to let them take her not without a fight. The rifle in his hand felt heavy, but it was the only weapon they had. He had never been in a real battle. Never. Had to defend his life like this, but he couldn't think of anything else now. "Stay close," Kay said, his voice low but urgent. He could feel the girl's presence beside him, her eyes scanning the area, just as his were. They had to make it to the top of the ledge. From there, they could look for an escape route, maybe even fight back. But as they reached the top, they were met with an unexpected sight. The soldiers had anticipated their move. There were more of them waiting at the top. They had circled around, anticipating that John and the girl would try to climb to higher ground. Now they were trapped between two groups. The girl froze, her face drained of color as she realized the danger they were in. John's heart sank. The soldiers were blocking both exits now, and there was nowhere to go. He turned, looking around, desperately, but the rocks were sheer on all sides. There was no escape. "Drop your weapons," one of the soldiers shouted, his voice carrying through the night. He had a commanding presence, a voice that made it clear he was in charge. "You're surrounded. There's nowhere to run." John tightened his grip on the rifle. His heart was racing, but he wasn't about to give up. Not without a fight. "You don't have to do this," the girl said suddenly, her voice calm. But there was a hint of something dangerous in her words. John looked at her, surprised. She was standing tall now, her shoulders squared, as if she was no longer the injured, vulnerable girl he had found in the forest. Something had changed in her. The leader of the soldiers sneered. "Do you think you can stop us? You're nothing but an exiled traitor. You don't belong here." "I belong wherever I choose to be," the girl responded coolly, her eyes hardening. Her voice was no longer that of a helpless fugitive, but of someone who had seen war, who had known power and loss. "And I won't let you take me without a fight." John didn't know what to make of it. He could feel the tension in the air. There was something about her words, something about the way she carried herself now that made him realize she wasn't just an innocent alien on the run. She was a warrior, one who had fought, one who had survived. Before anyone could react, she moved. In a blur of motion, she ducked low and kicked one of the soldiers off balance. The soldier fell, crashing into another, and for a brief moment, chaos erupted. John's instincts kicked in. He raised the rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The soldiers hesitated, momentarily thrown off by the sudden attack, and that was all the opening they needed. The girl wasted no time. She lunged at one of the soldiers, her movements swift and precise. John couldn't believe his eyes as she knocked the soldier down with a single, powerful strike. It was like watching a predator in the wild, ferocious, and unstoppable. But John wasn't just going to stand there. As the remaining soldiers turned their attention to the girl, he aimed his rifle at one of them and fired. The shot hit the soldier's arm, sending him sprawling backward. The remaining soldiers hesitated, their eyes darting between John and the girl. They had expected an easy capture, but now they were faced with a fight. One they weren't prepared for. John's heart was pounding. As he glanced at the girl, she was moving like lightning, taking down the soldiers one by one, and with each strike, her confidence grew. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for something more, something bigger than herself. The leader of the soldiers barked an order, and the remaining men retreated, realizing they were outmatched. For a moment, the world stood still. The sound of the wind seemed to fade, and all John could hear was the heavy breathing of the girl and himself. He looked at her, and she met his gaze, her eyes full of fire. "We're not safe yet," she said, her voice low but fierce. "They'll be back, and they won't give up." John nodded, the weight of their situation settling in. But for the first time since they'd been running, he felt something else. Hope. They had fought back. They had survived. And as long as they had each other, they could keep fighting. "We'll be ready," he said. "We won't let them take you." As the night stretched on, the forest around them felt more dangerous than ever. But John knew one thing for sure. They had just begun their fight for survival. The fire was dimming, casting long shadows against the walls of the cabin. John and the girl had found a hidden place deep within the forest to rest, far from the soldiers who had hunted them. The battle they fought earlier had left them both exhausted, but there was no time for rest. John knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. The soldiers would return. He could feel it in his bones. The girl, her face still streaked with dirt and exhaustion, sat by the fire, her eyes distant as she stared into the flames. Her expression was hard to read, a mixture of sadness and resolve. She hadn't spoken much since the fight. John wasn't sure what she was thinking, but he didn't press her. They both needed a moment to recover. The silence between them was comfortable, but there was an undercurrent of tension. Suddenly, a sound broke the stillness of the forest, a twig snapping in the distance. John's head snapped up, his instincts instantly alert. The sound was faint, but it was enough to send a wave of unease through him. He looked at the girl, who also had tensed at the noise. "They're back," she whispered, her voice filled with dread. Her eyes searched the shadows, as if she could see through the trees, sensing their presence before they even arrived. But not just them. Someone else is here. John's heart skipped. He had no idea what she meant. Who else could be here? Had they been followed again? Before he could ask, a figure emerged from the shadows, moving with purpose, but still carefully. The figure stepped into the weak light of the fire, revealing a man John knew all too well. It was Samuel, a former ally, a man John had trusted once before. But as the figure stepped closer, John's heart sank. "What are you doing here?" John asked, his voice guarded. Samuel stopped just beyond the light of the fire, his face unreadable. He was tall, with a strong build, but something about his presence felt wrong. John could see the subtle shift in his posture, the way his eyes darted nervously around them, as though looking for an escape route. "I came to help," Samuel said. His voice smooth, but there was a strange hesitation in his words. His eyes flicked toward the girl, and John caught the faintest hint of surprise in his expression. "I didn't know you'd be with her." The girl stiffened, her gaze narrowing as she stood up, the muscles in her body tense. "You?" she demanded, her voice sharp. She didn't trust him. John could see it. In the way she held herself, ready to strike if she needed to. "I'm an old friend of John's," Samuel replied, his voice almost too calm. He didn't seem fazed by the girl's hostility. "I know him well. We were in the same unit back." Before all of this started, John's mind raced. He hadn't seen Samuel in years, not since he left the military. Samuel was a skilled fighter, but he had always been a bit unpredictable. Still, John never expected to see him here in the middle of this mess. Something didn't sit right with him. "You shouldn't be here," John said slowly, his eyes narrowed. "I don't trust you anymore, Samuel." Samuel's face darkened, but he kept his cool. "I don't care if you trust me, John. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to help you get out of this alive." John clenched his fists. He knew Samuel too well to believe that statement. Samuel wasn't the type of person who did anything without a hidden agenda. And the girl, who had been silent until now, could sense it too. She took a step forward, her eyes locked on Samuel. "Help us," she scoffed. "Or betray us." The words hit Samuel like a punch to the gut, and for the first time, John saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. But before either of them could speak again, a sharp crack echoed from the trees. The unmistakable sound of a weapon being cocked. "Drop your weapons," a new voice barked, harsh and commanding, from the shadows. Another group of soldiers appeared, stepping into the clearing with their guns raised. The air grew heavy with the threat of violence. John's stomach churned, his mind racing to come up with a plan. They were outnumbered, trapped once again. Samuel looked from John to the soldiers, a flash of something dangerous crossing his face. "I'm sorry, John," he said, his voice cold now, "but I made a deal, and I'm going to keep it." John's eyes widened as he realized the truths Samuel had betrayed them. His old ally had been working with the soldiers all along, pretending to help only to lead them straight into a trap. The sick feeling in John's stomach deepened as he realized how easily he had been fooled. "You," John started, his voice shaking with anger. But before he could say anything more, the soldiers moved in. Their guns aimed directly at him and the girl. The girl's eyes flashed with fury. She was ready to fight, but John could see the hopelessness in her expression. They were surrounded. There was no way out this time. Samuel had sold them out. "You don't have to do this, Samuel," John said, his voice low, filled with disappointment. "We were friends." Samuel didn't respond. Instead, he nodded to the soldiers, signaling them to move in. The leader of the soldiers stepped forward, his face grim. "This is over," the leader said, his voice like gravel. "You're both coming with us. There's nowhere to run." The girl stepped forward, her eyes wild with defiance. "I'll never go with you," she spat, "and neither will he." The soldiers moved to restrain them, but just as they stepped forward, the girl reacted. With lightning speed, she lashed out, taking down two soldiers before they could even raise their weapons. John followed her lead, using the element of surprise to fight back. But despite their efforts, the numbers were against them. And then, with a sudden movement, one of the soldiers shot at John. The bullet grazed his arm, causing him to stagger back, but he didn't fall. He couldn't afford to. Not now. Not when they were so close to losing everything. John gritted, his teeth clenched in pain. You made a mistake. Samuel's expression didn't change. His betrayal had cut deeper than any wound. The man he once called a friend was now the one who had led them into this nightmare. And John knew one thing for sure: there was no going back. The night felt heavier than it ever had before. The air was thick with tension, and the faint glow of the fire did little to calm the nerves that had frayed over the past few days. John leaned against a tree, his body sore from the fight, his mind struggling to piece together the reality of what had just happened. Samuel's betrayal still stung like a fresh wound, but there was no time to dwell on it. They had survived, for now, but the danger wasn't over. The girl sat across from him, her eyes watching the horizon with a distant, almost haunted look. She had barely spoken since the fight with Samuel and the soldiers. John knew she was deep in thought, her mind likely replaying everything that had led them to this point. It wasn't easy, carrying the weight of betrayal, especially from someone you once called a friend. You okay? John asked, breaking the silence. He didn't expect her to answer right away. She had always been closed off, but he couldn't help but wonder if, after everything they had been through, she was starting to trust him. The girl glanced up at him, her eyes tired but sharp. I'm fine, she said, though there was a tremor in her voice that told him otherwise. But this, ... this can't be the end. John nodded, his jaw tightening. It won't be. We'll keep fighting. As long as we have breath, we'll keep fighting. She stood up slowly, her movements graceful but burdened by the weight of her thoughts. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something more than just the fear and anger in her eyes. There was a spark of something hope. Maybe? Or perhaps it was just the determination that had kept her alive all this time. Where do we go from here? She asked, her voice softer than it had been before. Samuel and the soldiers won't stop coming. They'll never leave us alone. We'll keep moving, John said. The forest's vast. They can't track us forever. The girl shook her head. It's not just about running anymore. We need to find something more. A way to stop them. A way to end all of this. John looked at her, trying to understand. What are you saying? She looked down at the ground, her fingers lightly tracing the dirt. My people, ... they're still out there. They don't care about me. But there are others who want to see this empire fall. If we can find them, if we can get to them, maybe they can help. John took a deep breath. The idea seemed crazy, and yet something in him believed it could be their only hope. She was right. The fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about bringing down the empire that had betrayed her, and maybe even the whole galaxy's system of power. You think there's a group out there willing to stand against their own people? John asked, unsure of what to believe. I know there is, she said, her voice steady now. There's always a resistance. But we need to find them. It's our only chance. John stood up, his muscles protesting, but he didn't care. He had made a promise to protect her, and now he understood it wasn't just about keeping her alive. It was about giving her a chance to fight back, to take back what was stolen from her. We'll find them, John said, his voice filled with conviction. Together. The girl looked at him for a moment, and then something shifted. A small, cautious smile appeared on her face, a smile that spoke volumes more than words ever could. She was no longer just the alien girl on the run. She was a warrior, and John realized that, for better or worse, he had become part of her fight. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. John nodded, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. They had come so far, and there was still so much more to do. But the path ahead wasn't as uncertain as it once was. For the first time since he had found her in the woods, he could see a future chance at something more than just survival. As the night grew colder, They packed what little they had left, preparing to leave the safety of their temporary hiding place. They had no idea where the resistance might be or what kind of dangers lay ahead. But they knew one thing: they weren't alone anymore. The forest, once a dark and lonely place, now felt different. It wasn't just a prison anymore. It was a place of possibility, a place where they could begin again. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and together they would face whatever came next. John looked at the girl one last time, meeting her gaze with a sense of resolve. "Let's go," he said, without another word. They turned and walked into the forest, the sound of their footsteps fading into the night. Ahead of them lay a long and uncertain journey, but John no longer feared it. They had fought and survived. Now, they would take the fight to the heart of the empire itself. And no matter the odds, they would see it through. The girl's past might have been filled with pain and betrayal, but her future was no longer defined by those things. She was no longer just a victim. She was a force that, with John by her side, would take on the empire and everything that stood in their way. And together, they would begin a new chapter.